Today, we're diving into a seriously fascinating transformation. We're looking at the origins of football, but let me tell you, the history of the world's most popular sport looks absolutely nothing like the polished, professional matches we see on our screens today. Long before the multi-million-dollar stadiums, the pristine grass, and the structured global tournaments, football was something else entirely. It was, well, pure, unadulterated chaos. So in this explainer, we're going to trace exactly how a wild, incredibly violent game was somehow wrangled into a structured global phenomenon.
To put it into perspective, one historical account perfectly captures it, calling early football less of a sport and more like organized riots. And honestly, that hits the nail on the head. In medieval England, there was absolutely no such thing as an official football match. Forget about referees, forget about sidelines, and definitely forget about time limits. Sometimes there weren't even teams in the modern sense of the word. We're talking about massive, ruleless brawls that just happen to have a ball somewhere in the middle of the madness. Part 1. The Era of Chaos, Village Pride, and Violent Matches. Okay, let's really dive into this because the sheer scale of these early games is kind of hard to wrap your head around today. We aren't talking about playing a quick pickup game in a local park. Entire villages would challenge neighboring villages in these massive annual matches. The field, if you can even call it that, could stretch for literally miles. Players were crossing roads, wading through rivers, trampling over farms, and navigating dense forests. The objective? Simply move the ball into the opposing village. But how you got it there? Well, everything in between was completely fair game, and hundreds of people would be taking part all at once. Pushing, punching, wrestling. This was the reality on the ground. The raw violence of these early games was just staggering. Even kicking your opponents wasn't considered unusual. It was just part of the experience. Honestly, the ball was almost just an excuse. The real competition, the real driving force behind all this chaos was raw village pride. It was a way to settle scores and prove your dominance. But as you can probably imagine, with hundreds of people wrestling through a river, injuries were incredibly common. Property was routinely destroyed, and local authorities, they absolutely dreaded match days. Part 2. A sport on the brink. Popularity breeds problems. You see, the game's massive popularity led directly to a major societal crisis. As the game spread like wildfire across England, so did the absolute mayhem that came with it. It wasn't just a weekend hobby anymore. The sport was so infectious that people were abandoning their daily duties. They were skipping work, local markets were shutting down because everyone was busy fighting over a ball, and whole communities were left dealing with broken bones and, well, bloody aftermaths. Because of all this, kings actually issued royal bans against playing. Town officials were constantly filing complaints. Church leaders heavily criticized the game from the pulpit. And the crucial thing to understand here is that they didn't criticize football because it wasn't popular. They criticized it because it was way too popular. Local governments and authorities viewed football not as entertainment, but as a severe threat to society. It had become a full-blown public order problem, and this relentless pushback brought the sport to the absolute brink of extinction. Which brings us to the pivotal question of this entire era. What exactly were the rules? Well, the answer is nobody knew, because they just didn't exist. Every single town had its own version. Every local school invented its own traditions. So if two different schools or villages actually wanted to play against each other, they'd often spend more time arguing bitterly over the rules than they did actually playing the game. I mean, some wanted to carry the ball, some wanted to tackle, some banned tackling entirely. The world's favorite game had zero universal rulebook, and without one, it became incredibly clear that the sport simply had no future. Part 3. The Cambridge Rules. Fixing the game. This brings us to a huge turning point. Right in the midst of all this chaos and looming bans, teachers and students at the University of Cambridge looked at the sport differently. They asked a revolutionary question. What if, instead of banning the game completely, we just fixed it? In the 19th century, these students proposed a massive paradigm shift. Instead of the pure chaos, the mud, the spontaneous violence, the total lack of time limits, they envisioned a much more structured approach. They wanted fairness, agreed upon rules, and a universal structure that everyone could actually abide by. Basically, they wanted to strip away the riot, but keep the sport. So why did they want to save it? Because despite the violence, they recognized that the game taught incredibly valuable skills. It forced teamwork, it demanded leadership, it required deep strategy and incredibly quick decision-making under intense pressure. They saw the diamond in the rough here, and that inspired them to actually sit down and start writing out a common set of rules in the 1840s. And those rules, the Cambridge Rules drafted in the 1840s, were an absolute game changer. For the very first time, they allowed players from entirely different schools to finally compete fairly against one another. This was the exact moment everything changed. The crucial takeaway here is this. Structure had finally arrived. There was no more arguing for hours before kickoff, no more inventing convenient rules on the spot just to save your team. Now, while these specific rules weren't perfectly identical to today's modern laws of the game, they did the heavy lifting. They transformed a sprawling, organized chaos into a legitimate, foundationally solid sport.
Part 4. One sport becomes two, the great debate.
But there was still one massive, glaring problem left to solve. Should players be allowed to use their hands? By the middle of the 19th century, football clubs were popping up all across England. And on one side of this epic clash, you had clubs advocating for a fast-paced game played almost entirely with the feet. But on the other side, you had clubs who passionately believed that picking up and carrying the ball made the sport far more dynamic and exciting. And the kicker? Neither side was willing to give an inch. They absolutely refused to compromise. So following those Cambridge rules in the 1840s, we arrive at a critical make-or-break moment in 1863. Representatives from several prominent clubs gathered in London to settle this hands versus feet debate once and for all. Think of this meeting almost like a high-stakes corporate negotiation. The tension was palpable. And the result? They officially formed the Football Association, or the FA. In their brand new definitive rulebook, they explicitly banned carrying the ball by hand. Ultimately, the feet had won. The fallout from that 1863 meeting quite literally shaped the modern sporting world. The clubs that accepted the feet-only rules, they formed the Football Association, creating the global sport we now know as association football, or simply soccer to some. But the clubs that preferred handling the ball, they just didn't conform. They completely walked away. 8 years later, in 1871, they formed their own governing body, the Rugby Football Union. Think about that for a second. One massive disagreement over a single rule formally split the organized game into two completely different, world-renowned sports. Which leads us to this incredibly important realization. England's greatest contribution wasn't inventing the act of kicking a ball. As history clearly shows us, China had been playing kicking games for centuries prior, and Italy had created its own brutal, kicking-based version of a game too. But England accomplished something no other civilization had done before it. It gave the world a single, universally agreed-upon set of rules. And once that structure was in place, once everyone finally agreed on exactly how to play, football could finally leave those muddy village rivers and conquer the entire world.
So I'll leave you with this final provocative thought. How different would the world be today if that 1863 meeting had decided to let players use their hands? Just think about the billions of fans, the World Cups, the entire global culture of the sport we know today. All of it hinges on a group of men in a London room deciding to ban the use of hands. It really makes you ponder how a single historical disagreement, literally a fight over one rule, completely shaped modern global culture. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.